When you don't have money to feed your family tomorrow, your income is going to be your number one concern.
Another record high for coronavirus infections.
And that obviously means hardship.
Gig workers are suffering.
These are gig economy workers. These are hustlers. These are people who are piecing together different parts of income to make the ends meet for themselves and their family.
Very difficult for us to find work.
Lack of a social safety net.
We had a study of gig workers across 5 countries.
5 countries. In a world that's seen politics and economies overturned, the gig economy, such an economic lifeline such a short time ago, today dropping workers into insecurity and debt. Blue-collar gig workers,
I am so behind on rent.
From ride-sharing to delivery to home services, once expected to add up to $2.7 trillion in GDP by 2025. Surveyed over recent months, a comprehensive new study measuring global impacts on gig workers' lives and their remarkable resilience.
And the mission for Flourish is to help vulnerable populations.
We felt it was important to understand how they were being impacted, and equally importantly, how we collectively can help them navigate what is a very difficult situation.
Flourish Ventures, a $500 million fintech venture capital firm with global outreach, partnered with local firms to survey 3,000 gig workers across 5 countries affected by the global pandemic. Called The Digital Hustle, Gig Workers' Financial Lives Under Pressure. The study shows gig workers struggling to cope with COVID economic shock.
Across the board, workers' biggest concern was their ability to earn a living. But a close second to that in many countries was this concern about health risks. And I think the two are very closely intertwined. When you don't have money to feed your family tomorrow, your income is going to be your number one concern.
On average, 66% of respondents across all countries reported major income loss. In India, a staggering 81% saw a collapse in take-home pay. Most report reducing consumption like food. They survive on savings and borrowing and finding whatever work they can.
It was total lockdown for the first 2.5 months. In that context, many of them had already seen a steep decline in their incomes, and their ability to survive actually was under question.
Nearly half of Indian gig workers said they couldn't last more than a month without borrowing from friends or family. For 1 in 5, less than a week. Findings that are echoed across the study. In the U.S., 37% said they couldn't last even a week without borrowing. Indonesia and South Africa, similar findings. The problem even more urgent in Brazil.
More than 40% of Brazilians have expressed a lack of hope, so having no sources of hope throughout this crisis. That is compared to, at least in the early days, the global average around 16%.
Across the board, the study found similarities and disparities. Similar concern over cutting back on food and essentials. Savings buttressing workers significantly in India and South Africa, lower in Brazil and the United States. Surprisingly few women responded to the survey, both underrepresented in this study and in the gig workforce itself.
In India, for example, we noticed that the few women who were part of the gig economy got hit somewhat harder, and they also ended up with a higher degree of taking care and being responsible for extended family.
South Africa saw only 5% of women represented in the study.
What really hit home for us was how close to the edge so many of these people are living.
People are cutting consumption. They're not taking hot showers. They are dipping into savings. They are building new skills.
Cutting expenses, not paying off debt.
And here in South Africa, while the lockdown was on, very few workers were able to find other jobs. Not because they didn't try, not because they didn't hustle, but because those opportunities were so low.
In Indonesia, the highest number of respondents last March made over $200 a month. Just a few months later, that crashed. 4 out of 5 now bringing home $0 to $70. Household service workers hit hardest, and still they adapt.
I think there is this emphasis on reskilling and readapting, and that is a great demonstration of the grit and resilience that we are seeing in Indonesia.
One small lifeline in the form of government aid in Brazil, India, and the U.S. For those who got it, it brought hope for now.
And I'd imagine that if we were to survey again these cities, that it would be only greater dire need of these types of assistance and interventions, in part because whatever savings and that was taken advantage of, particularly with stimulus, has since run out. And that's a really tough place to be.
And tougher still for African American and Latinx communities in the United States. More than 60% now earning less than $1,000 a month, and the process to get unemployment benefits has been confusing.
And frankly, we're at risk of trailing the rest of the world, right? When we look at India, where we're with the push of a button, the government was able to send money to vulnerable individuals more quickly than here in the U.S. I think that's something we want to take inspiration from and think about how can it be replicated.
Where can inspiration be found? In the way workers pivot.
In Brazil, we saw that 45% of digital gig workers were seeking additional work, either by joining e-hailing platforms or delivery platforms, supplementing their income or gaining a new source of income by upskilling themselves, starting their own business.
Worker goals include learning new skills, finding new, better-paying jobs, saving for the future, paying off debt. The question begs, how do policymakers, entrepreneurs, and investors team up to help them reach those goals?
I think it's also very important that the government itself is able to engage in the modernization of their own infrastructure so that we can see those benefits in real time and target the consumers who need it.
There's a whole cadre of entrepreneurs who are building solutions, financial services primarily, to these gig workers and accessing them through these platforms. Hopefully this inspires a little more innovation from that class of entrepreneurs.
There might be insurance innovations around income protection, health insurance. So there is a whole host of things that fintech can do as one enabler in what obviously is a much bigger and much more complex situation.
It's not enough to just be an investor. You need to think about the broader ecosystem.
We like to think of ourselves as hard-headed but soft-hearted investors.
We believe that by bringing all of these facets together, you can actually work towards building a fairer, more just, equitable financial system.
And we believe that tech-led innovation can be a force for good.
We really want to solve this for the long term, and that's such a privilege that we have at Flourish Ventures.